Please help me make sense of this. Neil deGrasse Tyson in the last few years seems to have shed his scientific image for a more political one, and I think this conversation he had with Konstantin Kisin from Trigonometry will make you want to pull your hair out at his unwillingness to answer a straight question. If you followed Neil for the past few years like I have, you know how he's become notorious for the debate around gender ideology and transgender bathrooms. Just take a look at this before I dive deeper into it.
One of your functions over time has been to communicate scientific knowledge to the public.
Yeah.
And that's why I was quite surprised to hear you talk about the idea that we all exist on a spectrum where you wake up one day and you feel like you're more female and more male.
The XXXY chromosomes are insufficient because when we wake up in the morning, we exaggerate whatever feature we want to portray the gender of our choice. Suppose no matter my chromosomes, today I feel 80% female, 20% male. I'm gonna put on makeup. I'm gonna do that. Tomorrow I might feel 80% male. I'll remove the makeup and I'll wear a muscle shirt. Why do you care?
Yeah.
What business is it of yours to require that I fulfill your inability to think of gender on a spectrum? My only point was that if who you decide is male and female in the street is a construct of style and trends and what the beauty industrial complex wants you to see, if that's how we establish gender, then maybe some people want to be fluid within that gender identify. So they'll wear a skirt, but maybe have a beard, or they'll mix and match that in whatever way
Neil,
you want.
Hold
on. I'm not, wait, I'm almost done. So,
okay.
If a person using the tools of the beauty industrial complex wants to mix and match this,
yeah,
and they are expressing their freedom in a free country to do so, why is your job to tell them not to?
Okay.
That's my only point. And so I'm speaking of gender expression and the freedom to do so.
That's how you talk a lot without really saying anything, which is sad because I used to be such a big fan.
I'm just disappointed.
Not for once do you see Neil even try to grapple with the core of the contention, which is that the divisions we've built in things like bathrooms, locker rooms, sports team, and parliaments are based on biological sex, not subjective gender. By the way, do subscribe for important discussions like this if you enjoy it. And did he say that you can put on makeup and be 20% female? Can you imagine hearing that just a few years ago in anything other than parody? That's what happens when you take to the extreme the supposed separation between the idea of gender versus sex, if you even recognize the distinction in the first place. Here's what's happening now. The entire case for gender as a separate term for self-identity is collapsing back into the case for binary of sex. In other words, if people from one biological sex have portrayed a certain type of cultural or fashion characteristic, then simply changing those outward characteristics does not change your sex. It's that seemingly tiny distinction that is eating up the rights, privacy, and spaces of women that they've worked so hard for. And if you're wondering where this kind of ideology leads, we saw the most extreme example of this when there were instances of Britain of trans women being housed in female prison, despite the fact that they were facing charges of sexual assault on females. Just watch the former First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, struggle to find her words trying to defend this.
Trans women are women, but in the prison context, there is no automatic right for a trans woman.
So there are contexts where a trans woman is not a woman?
No, there is circumstances in which a trans woman will be housed in the male prison estate.
Is there any context in which a woman born as a woman will be housed in the male estate?
Look, we're talking here about trans women.
And I'm now asking about women born as women.
I don't think there are circumstances there, but...
So it's different for trans women?
Well, yes, and I'm not...
So they're not equal. Should someone who has a history of committing sexual crimes against women be allowed to get a gender recognition certificate?
Well, there are, of course, provisions in that legislation which is not yet in force, whereby if somebody is going through the process of getting a gender recognition certificate and there are concerns about that, there can be a pause put in that.
But I want to come to Neil deGrasse Tyson because that's the curious case for one of America's most celebrated scientific popularizers suddenly finding himself defending that same conflation between sex and gender. The truth is, the implication by Neil that anyone's preventing people from breaking cultural or fashion boundaries of gender is simply a distraction from the very real concern of biological women. And biology is not a matter of putting on makeup or switching up a dress. It's encoded in every last cell and every last DNA strand of a person.
First of all, I don't know a single person, and we've talked to trans people on the show. We have trans employees at Trigonometry. We've spoken to all sorts of people about this issue. I do not know a single person who wants to prevent people from dressing how they want or behaving how they want or choosing any name that they want. However, the problem is...
So you don't... But you know such people are out there.
I'm sure such people exist in the same way that there are people who believe that the Earth is flat and so on. But they're a tiny minority.
They exist.
It is
I don't know how tiny they are, given the dialogue today.
Fair point. However, what I would say is that the conversation in the public consciousness has become prominent not between people who want to defend the right of anyone to dress how they want and the people who want to prevent that. The reason the conversation has become an issue is that we assign and allow certain privileges to people based on their sex. If you are female, you get to go to places that only other females are in, like changing rooms and toilets and so on. If you are female, you get to compete only with people of your sex because females are at a disadvantage in physical competition to males in almost every sport. In other words, we carve out certain areas where your sex matters tremendously, even though we may respect your right everywhere else to believe that you are whatever you are, to dress however you are, etc. So your claim that today you woke up and put lipstick on and grew your hair out long and tweezed out your mustache and whatever, and therefore you are female, has an impact on other people in certain contexts in which that is a problem.
You gave only two contexts. Do you have others?
Sorry, I wasn't finished. And in those contexts, it is essential, people would argue, to protect women from unfair competition and from various risks for which female-only spaces already exist.
And you know what the interesting thing is? Women themselves are made no party to the conversation here. In the world of the far-left gender ideologues, it's not that women decide who can come into female spaces, but the people outside that decide who can go in. And that's the inaccurate framing of the conversation that ultimately gets you nowhere. It's not just sports bathrooms and prisons, because in those areas someone like Neil can try and cobble together some incoherent response, borrowing from physiology and hormones, but what happens when even women's beauty contests have their entire foundation questioned with the inclusion of people that identify as women? That's not just conjecture, because that's exactly what happened last year when a biological male or a transgender woman ended up becoming Miss Netherlands and winning the contest over at least a dozen women. It's at that moment when you see the women clapping at having their opportunity taken away that you realize that it's not even about physical differences anymore, but the very real identity of what it means to be a woman in the first place. For someone like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's a rationalist and a scientist, it's truly incredible to see him not even want to engage in the debate on the basis of science and biology. That seems to be a common theme with a lot of people that otherwise proclaim a more rationalist worldview, and yet sacrifice that rationality to subjectivity on this one topic. That includes people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, Bill Nye, and Matt Dillahunty, and it's always unsettling to see why that is. I remember Patrick Bet-David had a conversation with Neil deGrasse Tyson not long ago, and he later remarked that it almost seemed like Neil was being forced to hold those opinions on gender that make little to no sense on their face. You don't have to take that wholesale, but it is an expression of the frustration you see when someone that calls themselves a man of science suddenly starts talking about feeling 20% male on one day or 60% female on another day. Prominent author and evolutionary psychologist had one of the most hilariously sarcastic ways to come back at Neil for these ideas. Take a look for yourself.
I wanted to show you that I actually agree, because remember he said, today I feel like I'm 80% male, I don't wear makeup. Tomorrow I feel 80% female. I wear makeup and so on. So because male and female is really not about chromosomes. It's not about anatomical differences, physiological differences, behavioral differences, hormonal differences, morphological differences. It's not the 117 billion people that have existed throughout humanity and that exactly knew what male and female were corrected when Neil deGrasse Tyson. That's why he's a physicist. He works on a different plane, just like his brain has been lost in a black hole. And so what I thought I would do is show you how right now I'm 100% male. Okay, you see it? Now watch this. No, this is not this one. I'm going to wear this one. This is, see this one? I'm wearing this, looks nice. Now I'm about 20% female. Okay, because this is sexy. It's aposematic coloring. I'm demonstrating that I am ideologically fierce with my hair coloring, but that's only about 20% female. Now this one is pink, and we know that pink is female. We know that from science. And so therefore, just like my
ridicule of an idea is an important tool in a rationalist toolkit, and we may have seen a pretty good example of that. What's more interesting is that there's really nothing fundamentally or logically incoherent from the perspective of Neil deGrasse Tyson with what SAD just did, because after all, fashion and other external phenotypes can change the gender category to which you belong. I think the conversation you just heard only further reveals how you can't really take someone's worldviews wholesale, and how there's really no one in the world that's immune to believing in ideas that make no coherent sense in themselves. The antidote to that is always to be willing to listen, which is exactly what the hosts at Trigonometry did. In the end, perhaps it revealed to the rest of the audience that Neil deGrasse Tyson should really just stick to the astrophysics.